welcome back. My name is Stasha, for those of you who don't know. This is Lila, and she's going to be helping me demonstrate today. So in today's video, we are going to discuss recall. I would like to discuss some of the most common mistakes that I see as a trainer that people make when they're trying to teach their dogs recall, and how to most effectively train a solid recall without potentially using aversives or e-collars. I am also going to talk about what to do if your dog won't recall and it might be an emergency situation. Alright, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the most common mistakes that I see when people are trying to teach a recall. The first one is people think that just because their dog can recall in the house, when they're in their kitchen at dinner time, they'll be able to recall everywhere. Unfortunately, as awesome as this would be, it is not necessarily true. Dogs are very much what we know as context learners, or place learners, which means that their cues aren't just a word, right? They take a cue from an entire environment. It can be things that we say combined with the smells around them and the other things they hear and the stuff that they see. And they do not automatically generalize their behaviors. So if a dog is always being taught something in the same environment and then you change the environment, even if your words are the same, because the smells have changed and the other sounds have changed and so much else has changed, they don't automatically apply it. This is why it is so important to make sure that you generalize all of your commands or anything you're teaching, whether it's sport, working discipline, obedience, anything. Anything you want your dog to do consistently, no matter where you are, you have to practice in several different places that are all different from each other. So a lot of people will start teaching their puppies recall in the house, maybe a little bit. The dog seems to be doing really well, and then they start taking it out to the bathroom. And when they're a really little puppy, they come back. Maybe they only go like 5 feet. But they find as they start going, the dog starts going through adolescence, suddenly the dog is not responding anymore, and they're like ignoring their handler 100%. And it makes people so frustrated. It's also very dangerous because if your dog has prey drive, right, and they see a squirrel or a cat and they decide to chase it across a room, that could be very bad for the dog. So it is crucial for the safety of our dogs and everybody around us that we teach a solid recall. I teach a lot of search dogs and detection dogs, and I am not like the type of person who tends to put tons of obedience on my dogs because I want them to think independently and not take cues from me. However, I always make sure that a dog has a solid recall because in a working environment, if they find themselves in a potentially very risky situation or you notice that there's a threat, you need to be able to call them back and have them respond no matter where you are. So when I start teaching recall, I start on a lead. And the reason for this is we want our words to have meaning. Our cues need to mean something specific to a dog, otherwise they're just noise. You'll hear me say this a lot, but dogs don't automatically understand English or French or any human language. We have to give our words meanings, and they have to be precise. Dogs need to know exactly what we're asking them to do. So, with recall, I'll start on a lead to minimize potential for error, and I'll make sure I have a lot of treats. Which brings me to my next mistake that people make. Right, before I go into actually how to teach this, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Next mistake. People don't reward their dogs for coming back. Now, for those of you who've seen my video about motivation, I think I mentioned that motivation is very much like a scale, right? We have what we want our dog to do on one side, and we have the alternatives on the other side. When we're outside, the dog's having fun, it's sniffing, it's engaging its olfactory system and its senses, and it's self-rewarding and fun. We are not a very high motivator. Unless our dog just loves us and hates being outside, which most dogs are not like that, at least not that I've met, we have to turn ourselves into a high motivator, something that the dog wants to come back to. So next big mistake I see people make is not only not rewarding their dogs when they're coming back, especially when you're first teaching this, but having the consequence be not so much fun. So people will call their dogs and put them in their crate just while they're about to leave for work. Or they'll call their dogs before bath times and the dog might hate the bath. What is this teaching your dog? It's teaching your dog that when they hear the word their name plus come or here, something bad or undesirable is going to occur after. So why would they come back? We need to make sure that we build a very positive association with our recall. We want to be the highest motivator for our dogs. We want to be fun and engaging, and we want to make sure that we turn into the handler that they deserve, right? So, next big mistake I see people make is they always practice recall from a stay. Typically, when you're going to call your dog back, they're not going to be focused on you. Going back to my previous point about how dogs are context learners, if a big part of their recall cue is seeing you in their immediate field of vision, if they can't see you, suddenly a massive part of your cue is gone, and they don't actually know to apply it there, right? So when I teach recall, I always make sure to start with a dog being distracted. Now, I have other issues with combining stay and recall right away because it can mess up a good stay as well if dogs get preemptive. So I like to keep them separate because they're incompatible behaviors anyways. But I like to train for reality. So however you're training, make sure you're training exactly the way you want your dog to respond in exactly the situation you want your dog to respond. If I know that I'm going to be calling my dog when we're outside and she's got all this land to go explore, I'm going to make sure she's distracted when I'm practicing this, and I'm going to make sure that I also practice teaching it from far away. So next mistake I see people make is they train only with a 5 or 6 foot lead. Training on a lead is great, and it provides another layer of accountability. But this being said, your dog will get used to doing something within a certain proximity of you. But what happens when your dog is 30 feet away or 40 feet away and now your voice sounds totally different? Some dogs will still come back, but a lot of them won't, especially if they're self-rewarding some other way, like following an animal scent or watching something that is more fun than you are, right? So I make sure that before I let my dog off lead where they can go meander freely, I've worked on a 6 foot lead, and I've worked at 10 feet, and 15 feet, and 30 feet, and sometimes even 50 feet on lead before they even get the chance to have freedom. Now I'm going to go through my kind of step-by-step working off a lead on a recall later on, but just make sure you're covering all your bases and make sure you practice in a bunch of different places. Your yard, right? Backyard, front yard, the park, next to the dog park, wherever you're going to be, make sure you practice. So next I want to talk a little bit about troubleshooting before we go into how to actually teach this, because this kind of ties in with some of the mistakes that I see people making, but it's not exactly the same thing. So when you let your dog off lead and they don't have a solid recall and they're out meandering away and you want them to come back, a lot of people will, Rover, come. Rover, come. Rover, come, right? And Rover's just ignoring us. We're just turning our cue into white noise. But finally we get so discouraged and so frustrated that we start walking towards Rover, right? And Rover hears us and picks up his head and looks, and he starts trotting away. So we walk faster. He starts trotting faster, right? Next thing you know, it's this game of cat and mouse where we're chasing our dog all over the yard and hoping to God we don't live next to like a busy road. And it's so frustrating. They've got 4 legs and can run way faster than we can. And it can take 30 minutes or an hour sometimes for people to get their dogs back in the house. If you let your dog off lead prematurely, first of all, and they ever have the chance to self-reward by not coming back, it teaches them that there is no consequence for not coming back, right? We're not ensuring that we give our cue meaning. We want to make sure that our dog is rock solid before they even have the chance to make that decision. So, going back to my original point with this game that dogs like to play, the chasing game, they can turn this into something very fun for themselves. And then they're going to do it again and again and again because it's technically rewarding for them mentally. Now, if you are ever in the situation where you need your dog to come back quickly, and this is not 100%, but this typically works better, what I will do is I'll try to get my dog's attention, and I'll kind of jump, get their attention like that, right? And then I'll take off running in the other direction. And I'm going to kind of show you this very lamely. With her, it's not going to have quite the same effect, but you'll get the idea. Now, the reason that this works better is a lot of dogs have some degree of prey drive. They're predators, right? They're natural hunters, and when they see things moving quickly, most of the time their first instinct is to chase. That's why this is oftentimes a lot more effective than chasing after them. So I have Lila, she's over here, and I want her to come back, right? Lila, Lila, right? I'm recalling, she's not listening. So I'm gonna, Lila, 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 and I'm gonna, come, ah! Right, Lila, come here, come here, yes, come here, good girl, right? And I'm gonna make sure that I reward that. So it got her going. Did you see how excited she got? You probably didn't get that whole field of vision. But she came right to me, maybe ran a tiny bit past me, but it's okay. If I get her close enough to be able to get her over by me, you guys can dramatically fall to the ground, right? And play with them for a second, and then grab their collar and take them back in the house. Now, if you find that you have to do that though, what that would tell you is your dog doesn't have a solid recall. You shouldn't have to play that game with them all the time. So, now I'm going to teach you how to train a recall. When I start training recall, I start on like a 5 or 6 foot lead, and I let my dog get distracted. If my dog or puppy has no recall at all, what I'll do is I'll start by using their name. Hopefully they know this a little bit, and I'll say it enthusiastically, and I'll take a couple steps back just to generate some enthusiasm. And the reason for this is because if I'm just like, Lila, come, she's gonna be like, oh man, like, this sucks. But if I, Lila, come, good girl, right? And when she comes back to me, I should have a treat ready, because for a dog who has no recall, you wanna make sure to reward the behavior immediately. We want to create super positive associations with this cue. So, Lila, come. Good girl. Good girl. So when I add the word come or here or whatever you guys are using, I start applying that cue when the dog is already moving towards me. I want to pair the word with the action, so there is no question in your dog's mind about what they're supposed to do. That's why I start by getting their attention with their name. Now, I'll probably have another video in the future about how to teach your dog its name, how to get your dog to focus on you using its name. But just in the meantime, start this after your dog has some idea of what its name is. So I have treats. She's not distracted, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to let her go off and wander. Good girl, right? Maybe walk around a little. No, walk around. When she's walking, I'm not, Lila, come. Good girl, nice. Good job, I know. So, you don't have to do that little backing up motion forever. I do it just to initiate some excitement, and then after the dog kind of is excited, then I stop. I still try to keep an enthusiastic voice though, just because we don't want to lose the dog's motivation right away. So now, I'm going to walk again. Good girl. Good girl. So I'm starting really, really, really close. And the reason for that is just like our other cues, anything we're trying to teach, we want to start as simply as possible and then gradually make the situation more complex. There's a couple different exercises you can do with recall. If you're an individual and you're just training by yourself, just wait till your dog gets distracted, go different places, use different size leads, whatever. If you've got family members, although, you can play a game. I typically do this with clients who have families, where you have 1 or 2 or 6 or however many people you want, and everybody's gonna spread out. You have the dog on a long line, and make sure everybody's only the distance enough where the dog can get to everyone without hitting the end of their lead. As soon as they hit the end of that leash, it's a correction, and the dog's gonna think twice about doing it again, right? So we wanna make sure that that dog can easily access everyone in the group. And you guys will just take turns calling the dog. And it's gonna be a great game where the dog just runs from one person to another getting treats. Now the fact that they don't know who's gonna call them next is part of the fun. A lot of smart dogs will get preemptive and they'll start running from person to person to person. And what happens is people don't know what to do, so they just reward the dog. But that doesn't teach the dog anything. So if I'm playing that game with 2 people and I might call Lila here, and then maybe my husband Tom calls her there, and then she runs back to me after because she knows I'm going to call her, then Tom will call her again. Whoever the dog is not by is going to be the next one to call them. Right? We're practicing for reality. If the dog is right next to me, why would I have to recall, right? So, once we can do this effectively on a 6-foot lead, we're going to switch to a long line. Now, I very much like between 30 and 50-foot leashes to teach this. 50-foot long lines are very long and they can easily get tangled. So just make sure to put them back nicely so you're not constantly having to untangle them. 10-foot long lines are fine, but 10 feet is still very close to 6 feet. And if your dog is 30 feet away, it's going to know the difference. If you don't have a long line, you can just use a rope. Anything that's a long lead that is strong enough to hold the dog in case it bolts off after something. And you want to make sure it's relatively light. So when I'm teaching recall, I like nylon leads. This is just a simple 30-foot nylon lead off Amazon. Really lightweight, really cheap. I use it to teach puppies how to trail, and I use it to teach obedience. Nylon tangles easily, or more easily than like some synthetic materials and leather, but it works really well for this because it's so light. We want to make sure that we're cueing the dog as little as possible when we're training them, so the less pressure you have from a lead, the better. So Lila's got it, right? I'm going to switch this over. And I'm going to start maybe at 10 feet. I'm not going to give her this whole lead yet. So now she's a little further away. And I don't know, you probably can't see her, but she's over there sniffing something. I'm going to make sure I have treats ready. And I'm gonna, Lila, come. Yes, good girl, nice. Just like that. Once she can do that effectively, I can walk around all over here and I never find myself having to say her name multiple times or kind of give her a nudge with that lead. Then I'm gonna give her even more room. Lila's got a decent recall, so I'm gonna give her the whole 30 feet and you guys just kind of watch this. Okay, so that was perfect. Now you want to practice that often in a bunch of different situations. Once your dog is able to do that well, then you want to drop your lead. That way, they can't see it in your hands. But when I start this, I tend to still keep it under a foot just in case the dog bolts off. Maybe they're super visually oriented and they notice. But you'll want to start here, practice from there, and then before you let them off lead entirely, you'll want to maybe unstep off that lead, right, or take a step off the lead, and maybe give them another 10 feet or so where they're close enough you can grab the end of that long line if you need to, but you still created a bit of extra distance. Practice from there, and once they got it, you should be good to start taking them off their long line. Just make sure when you start taking them off of their lead or their long line that they are coming back almost 100% of the time, if not 100% of the time. If they get the chance to self-reward once or twice, sometimes it can take you back a few steps and you have to kind of start over. And like I said, this is all about the safety of the dog and your sanity. So I hope you guys learned something today. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments section, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you so much.